Hey, what's up? It's Jared again from Supergiant Ninja. Welcome to another tutorial. Today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be finishing up the ink trail tutorial. In part 1 we rigged and animated the fish and had him swimming along a path. And today what we're going to be doing is we're going to jump into Turbulence FD and we're going to be actually making the ink. Now, if you guys don't have Turbulence FD, I would recommend that you go and purchase it. It's an awesome plugin and it's relatively cheap and you can do a lot of cool stuff with it. Smoke, ink, fire, that sort of thing. It can even do clouds. And if I remember correctly, it only costs about $500. And if you guys don't have the full version of the plugin, you can actually go and get a demo version. And it'll do just about everything that the full version does, except when you go to render it out, it'll just have some watermarks on it. Just a little heads up about the demo version though. If you go and you save some projects in the demo version, when you upgrade to the full version, you actually won't be able to open up those projects and use them again. Well, you can open up the projects, but your Turbulence FD simulations won't work in the full version. So just a heads up. Okay, now let's get going with the tutorial. So first off, what we're going to want to do is we're going to make a container. So if you go up to Plugins, Turbulence FD, click on Turbulence FD Container, what it's going to do is it's going to make this box here. And that's where we're going to be simulating our fluid. But as you can see, our container is a little bit small because we want it to cover this whole path that the fish is going to be swimming along. And so what we're going to have to do is either resize our container or resize the fish and his path. Now normally if it was something like a cube or any other kind of object, I would just resize it. But usually with Turbulence FD containers, I try to resize the other stuff to fit inside the container. That way I don't have to mess around with the voxel size or anything like that. And so there's an easy way that we can do that. So let me just delete this container real quick. And the way we're going to resize everything is we're going to go into the project settings. And so if you're on a Mac, that's Command D. On Windows, that would be Control D. And down here in the project settings, you can see there's a project scale. If you click on the button, Scale Project, it shows us that our current scale is 1, and we can actually make our target scale smaller to resize everything in the scene. So we'll make it like 0.2, so that'll make it like 20% of the size it is right now, and hit OK. And now if we go back up to Plugins, Turbulence FD, and make our container, it's going to be closer to the right size. And we'll just move it into position. Okay, so what we're going to want to do now is we're just going to resize it a little bit so that it's only covering the area around the spline here. And so if you go down here to the container tab, where it says grid size, you can change the size of the container. And so we'll just start changing that a little bit to fit a little bit better. And maybe make it a little bit smaller. And then we'll change the height down a little bit. No, that actually we want to make a little bit bigger. Okay, I think that's pretty close. And we can check it in our camera here. Yeah, I might make it just a little bit wider, just to be safe. Okay. One other thing is, usually when I have my camera in the right spot, in the spot that I want it, I'll go in and I'll put a protection tag on it. So Cinema 4D tags protection, and that'll just make it so you can't move it. And so once I have it set in the spot that I want, I put a protection tag on there just so I don't move it by accident. Okay, before we do our simulation, we have to go and put in some settings. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set a cache location. So if you click on your container, go down to the container tab. In here there's a cache, and we just need to set a location for our cache. And I'll just make a new folder. Hit open, and then hit new. And that's where we're going to cache our simulation out to. Now if we scroll down in here, you can see that it has these different checkboxes. And we do not want temperature checked right now. All we're going to be doing is dealing with the density channel. And usually when you do smoke, you just deal with the density channel. And so that's what we're going to use. And so we'll have density checked. And then we're going to go over to the simulation tab, and we'll go down to density and make sure that that is active. And we'll turn off temperature and make sure there's nothing else active like fuel or burn. Okay. Now we're going to go over to viewport preview, and we're going to set our channel to density. So that way when we run our simulation, we'll be able to see the smoke from our density channel in the viewport. Now we'll go over to the rendering tab, and under smoke shader, we're going to set that to density. And we're going to change the color of the smoke to black. Now that we've set up our container, we're going to go and we're going to make an emitter. And we're going to want to emit the ink or the smoke from the fish. And so if we go to fish and right click on it and go down to Turbulence FD, there's a Turbulence FD emitter tag, and put that on the fish. And down here in the settings, you can see there's a fill object checked, and we don't want that checked because we don't want the smoke filling up our fish. We just want it to come off of the outside. And then if we go down, we'll want to set the density value to 1 and leave all the other ones as 0. So now that we've done all the settings, we can actually go back and run our simulation and see what's going on. And so if we go up here, and I actually keep this Turbulence FD window here in my interface, but if you guys don't have that, just go up to Turbulence FD and plugins and bring up the simulation window. And that's what this is. And in here, just really quick, you can choose between your CPU or your GPU. And if you have a good graphics card, you should definitely use your GPU. I don't, and so usually I'll just stick to my CPU. It takes a little longer to simulate, but my graphics card isn't that great, and so if I use the GPU and then don't have enough memory, it'll crash a lot of times. And so usually I just stick to the CPU. But again, if you use the GPU, it'll go a lot faster. And we'll start the simulation. So if we go back and play it now, you'll see we're actually getting a trail already. If we pause it and render, we won't see it yet because we've got a black background. And so what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to make a white background. So we'll put a background in there, and then we'll make a new texture, and we'll make it white, and then we'll put that on our background, and then we'll render again. And you can see we're already getting this little bit of a trail here. I mean, it doesn't look very good yet because we need to go back and tweak some settings, but already we're getting a trail. And that was actually really fast, the simulation. Now one thing I want to show you is back here in the container, on the rendering tab here, there's a mapping option for the density channel. And if we go into here, if we click inside mapping, it'll bring up this editor here. And what we can do is we can change around the curve here, and it'll change the look of our smoke or our ink. And basically what this mapping editor does is you can add in points by right clicking, and you can drag things around so that you make different parts of your trail look lighter or darker, and different parts of the trail have more or less opacity. And so I'm just going to change it a little bit so we can see things a little bit better. And then do another render. And you can see that's kind of changed the look of our trail there. And I changed it to look like that because I wanted to show you where it's all emitting from. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to have the smoke emit off just the back of the fish. But here you can see it's actually coming off the front of the fish as well. And that's not what I want. I want it to just come off of the back of the fish. And there's actually an easy way that we can do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the fish. And then hit O to zoom in on them. And then hit O. And move over to the fish. So there's our fish. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make a selection of the fish. We're going to want to just select the parts that we want to emit the smoke. And so if we go into polygon mode, so we can select the different polygons, and then use our rectangle selection tool, and then uncheck only select visible elements. And then what we're going to do is we're going to select maybe just the back part of the fish. And so let's switch to an orthographic view. So all I want to get is maybe up to here. I don't know, maybe a little bit more. So now we've got that selected, and we'll switch back. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now that we have those selected, we want to go up to select and set selection. And what that did was make this selection right here. And so now if we go back to our emitter tag, you can see here in our fluid emitter, there's an area that says restrict to polygon selections. And so if we drag that selection in there, what it's going to do is it's going to make it so that the ink only comes from that part that we selected. And that's what we want it to do. So now if we go back, and go back to our container, and the container tab, and make a new cache, and then run the simulation again. This time it should just be emitting from the back. Yep. As you can see, it's not coming off the front at all. Now it's just coming off the back. And so that's an easy way that you can just pick and choose where you want the ink or the smoke to emit from. So now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go back and change some settings around so that we can make the trail actually look good. And so if we go into our container here and then go to the simulation and scroll down to density, what we're going to want to change is the dissipation. Because if you take a look at the trail, it goes all the way back and it doesn't disappear at all. And we want it to start disappearing somewhere back here. And so we can do that with this dissipation setting. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to raise that up to maybe, I don't know, like 15%. So that way it's disappearing a little quicker. And then what we can do is we can go back and make a new cache. So that way we can go back and compare and then run the simulation again. So now if we look at it, you can see that the trail is disappearing here. And if you want it to be shorter, you can raise the dissipation even more. If you want it to be a little bit longer, then you can lower it back down. But that looks pretty good. The next thing we're going to want to change back in the simulation tab again is we're going to want to change the vorticity and the turbulence a little bit. So to explain these two settings really simply, vorticity kind of makes a lot of little curls in the smoke or the ink. And turbulence will make bigger swirls. And so we're just going to want to put just a little bit of vorticity in there. So maybe 2. And then for turbulence, we're going to want to make that maybe 20. And then down here, we're going to want to make our swirls pretty big. And so we're going to make the largest size bigger. So maybe like 15 or something. And then if we go back to the container and make a new cache, we can run the simulation again. And then take a look at that. Now right now it's a little bit hard to see what's going on in there, and so we're going to want to go back to our rendering tab and up to the mapping. And if we play around with these settings a little bit, we'll be able to see it a little bit better. So as you can see, in here with the mapping, if you raise these up, it'll end up making it darker. And you're starting to see that there's a little bit of stuff going on back here. And so it's not just trailing straight, but we got a little bit of swirls going on. Let me just go back and if you want to, you can play with the thickness and the brightness and switch those around a little bit and see what that does. Let's raise it up and see if that looks any different. So it definitely made it darker and thicker. Let's just put it back to 15. Now, before I forget, one thing we're going to want to do is in the container, we're going to want to check this cache velocity. because once we get it looking how we want it to look, we're going to want to go back and do an up-res simulation, which is just going to be a higher quality, a better looking simulation. And so if we don't have cache velocity checked, we won't be able to do that up-res. And so just make sure you hit cache velocity once you're getting close. And then we'll run the simulation again. And this time we'll just override the one we just did. And let's take a look at that. And you can see that we're starting to get some of the swirls that we want. And now we just need to tweak the look a little bit so we can get it to look a little better. And there's a couple ways we can do that. One thing that we're going to want to do eventually is to make the quality a little bit better. And we can do that by switching the voxel size. So if we lower the voxel size, let's say to 0.7, that'll make the quality a little bit better. And so then if we run the simulation again, it'll start to take a little bit longer because now the quality is getting a little bit better. And if you noticed, we're starting to get a little bit more detail in some of the swirls and the wisps coming off of the fish. And so as you can see, now we're starting to get a little bit better quality and it's starting to look a little bit better. Let's look back here. See, now that's starting to look a lot better than before. And again, if we went to the mapping and changed some stuff around, it would change the look of that. And so if we went like that and rendered, you could see it changes it so that it looks different. Let's take a look at that. And then you could just play around with this until you get a look that you want. Anyways, we'll just kind of leave it like that maybe. Maybe we'll make it a little bit darker. Okay, we'll just leave it like that for now. And then if we go back to the container again, what we could do is, since we made these other caches every time, we could kind of compare the look. So this was the time that we just had a straight trail going on. We didn't add any turbulence in there. This was with the turbulence, and you can see it's starting to swirl. And this was with a little bit better quality because we changed the voxel size, and now we're starting to see a little bit more detail. And so if we do another one and change the voxel size a little bit more, maybe take it down to 0.4, and then run the simulation, we're going to see it start to look even better. So now hopefully we'll get even more detail in those swirls and wisps. Okay, it's almost done. See, and this one took a lot longer. Let's take a look. Yeah, so now it's starting to look better. And now you can see a lot more of the details here. And if we were to go back and play with the mapping some more, we could make it look a little different, but you guys get the general idea. So now that we have our trail put in, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to switch this from cache to upres. And hold off on doing this until you've got everything the way you want it. And so if you need to go back and change your turbulence settings or anything else, go back and do that. And then when you've got everything set, come over and do the upres. So now that we've selected upres, we can go ahead and hit start. And this may take a little bit, and so I might just pause it and come back when it's done for you guys, so you don't have to sit here and watch. Alright, the simulation's all done. It took about 3 minutes to get through that. Let's take a look at how it turned out. So now you can see it's looking pretty good. I mean, if we wanted to, we could have went back and added some more turbulence or maybe made the dissipation a little bit higher so that it would be disappearing a little quicker. But I kind of like how it looks. Yeah, I like that. And again, if you wanted to, you could go back to the mapping, and if you wanted it to look more like ink, kind of like we have it now, you would just want to raise a lot of this line up. If you wanted it to look more like smoke, you'd want to lower a lot of this down, so that way it becomes a little lighter and it looks a little more like smoke instead of ink. And that's pretty much it. Then what you'd want to do is you want to go and render it out. So if you hit Command B or Control B, what you'd want to do in here is you'd want to select multipass. And in multipass, what you'd want to do is either an atmosphere pass or an atmosphere multiply pass. I think I did an atmosphere multiply pass when I did it. And then in here, you just select what you want to render it out as. I think I did it as a PNG at 16 bits. And that's it. And then after you render it out, you just take it into After Effects and maybe tweak it a little bit with the curves. And if you remember from the preview, I had 4 different fish swimming through. And what I did was I just took that one render into After Effects and I moved the fish around and rotated a couple of them. So this one's swimming down, this one's swimming up, and then this one and this one are at a little bit different positions. One's a little higher than the other one, and then just set this one back in time a little bit. So it's the same render, I just duplicated it 3 more times. And so pretty easy stuff. I did want to show you one more thing before we're done. I know last time I showed you a couple of examples of how other people use this kind of effect, and they were really cool and everything. But you could definitely take it even further. And let me show you an example just to get your wheels spinning, just to get you thinking of some other ideas of what you could do. So if you guys remember this Harry Potter movie, Harry Harry went and he looked inside this like pool of water or whatever, and there's all this ink in there, right? And this is like a memory. But the ink forms into Dumbledore walking. You got ink coming off of all these objects in the scene. And like right here, you got this kid on a bike, and he's got this ink trailing after him. And that's the sort of thing that you could do with this effect. It doesn't have to be a fish or a bird or something like that that's emitting the smoke or the ink. You could totally take this effect and use it on live action footage. So like with this kid, all you'd have to do is get a model that matched up with this kid, match move that model so that it follows where the live action kid is going, and then emit from that model. And so it's basically the same thing that we just did, except you're just throwing in a little bit of modeling in there and a little bit of match moving. And that's it. And you're doing something really cool that they did in this major feature film. So hopefully you guys would try and think of other ways that you could use this effect and get you thinking about doing some even cooler stuff. So that's it for the tutorial. So hopefully you guys learned something and go have some fun in Turbulence FD. And I'll see you in the next tutorial.